They were meant to save our souls, deliver us from evil. But even men of God can fall into temptation.
He was a priest in name only.
Pastor Kevin Pouchet will stop at nothing to satisfy his greed.
He's someone very evil and sinister posing as a pastor.
Reverend Jimmy Swaggart puts pride before a fall.
It's a prostitute sex scandal.
These unholy men commit cardinal sins and bring eternal damnation.
I have sinned against you, my Lord.
Ask anyone at the Greater Faith Tabernacle Church of Deliverance, and they'll tell you how much they adore their pastor, Kevin Pouchet.
We had a persona that was massive, dynamic youth preacher, in demand.
So I give you Proverbs 28:25. A greedy man.
Pastor Pouchet was one of the best pastors that I ever heard preach. He could quote you the Bible backwards and forwards. Yes, he could.
The pastor may only be 29 years old, but he's had the calling since he was 15 and is so devoted to the Lord's work, he even founded his own congregation.
He was able to find a small church in East Baltimore, a really downtrodden area. The church was nothing to look at. It was his church, and he got money to fix it up.
When he came and we renovated the building, it was beautiful.
I've been invited there, and I can't lie, I was very impressed.
The church building was really nice. It looked like money, if you ask me.
But as they say, there's more to a church than a building, and the beloved minister truly seems to walk the walk.
Pastor Pouchet, he did a lot for the community. He reached out and truly tried to help everybody in the neighborhood with the little clothing drive and, gave away food.
Who could have known how short-lived these glory days would be? Just 2 years after founding the Greater Faith Tabernacle Church of Deliverance, Pastor Pouchet sees all his dreams go up in smoke.
I was really devastated when the church got burned up. I thought, I felt real bad for Pastor Pouchet.
Maybe the fire was all part of God's plan for Pouchet to change direction and focus on those in need.
Great to have you here. I heard a lot about you.
Kevin Pouchet had taken a job with a nonprofit called the ARC that works with developmentally disabled individuals. He took a job there as an operations manager.
And there, he appears to form a special bond with a poor fella named Lemuel Wallace, who's blind and mentally disabled.
Lemuel Wallace had goals and aspirations. He was trying to work. He wanted a girlfriend. He was trying to become more independent.
He always loved music, and he's just a fun guy.
How's things been? You been good?
They're good. I'd rather be somewhere else, but they're okay.
Someplace else, huh?
Pouchet offers practical help as well as spiritual guidance.
Mr. Wallace wanted to move to a new home within the ARC program where there would be some younger people he could be with.
If I find out anything, maybe I can speed up the process for you.
You're a good guy, Pouchet.
Yeah,
Good guy.
But the pastor's promises will never come to fruition. On February 5th, 2010, Baltimore police find a man shot to death in a park bathroom.
We were able to identify Mr. Wallace from an ARC of Baltimore identification card that was in his possession, and it had a picture of him as well as his name. We started processing the crime scene. There were some footprints that we were interested in, some gum that was left by a trash can. Even though killings are all too common in Baltimore, this one was unusual because it happened in the middle of the day, in a park, in a bathroom stall.
It bothered me a lot just because he really was a true innocent victim. This was beyond the pale even for Baltimore crime.
One of the worst parts of my job is having to make that notification, having to notify them that their loved one was now dead, and not just dead, but had been murdered.
It was just a sad day, man. I just block a lot of that stuff, man, because I still miss him. He was a very sweet young man from the day he was born. He was my little brother, my best friend.
I think every police officer has certain cases that become bookmarks in their career, and this is most certainly a bookmark case for me. On an emotional level, you can't help but be touched by this case when you have such an egregious crime.
Police hope to wrap the case quickly, but the evidence just isn't there. There's no murder weapon, DNA on the chewing gum is inconclusive, and the footprints they found are leading nowhere.
So you knew Lemuel quite well here.
Police visit the home where Wallace lived and speak to staff on duty that day.
Would you say Lemuel was quite a solitary figure here?
The victim was so vulnerable. I mean, there was nothing to suggest that Mr. Wallace had any enemies or any reason to be concerned for his well-being. So, right away we're thinking, why would somebody take him out to a park and execute him?
Okay, now I need to know as much as I can about Lemuel's visitor.
Right.
Okay, so it's a guy?
Yeah.
He comes in how tall?
5'11", maybe 6. He was tall.
Okay. And what was he wearing?
Detectives gather a physical description of the killer from the care home workers. They then use this to compile pictures of potential suspects.
Yeah.
Did he have a would you say a full face? Was he quite slim?
He was slim. He was slim.
I created a photographic array and took that photographic array to the employees that were present at the time when the suspect came and removed Mr. Wallace from his group home.
But nobody identifies anyone in the pictures, leaving the detectives in another dead end.
We reached out to our media, our local media, to see if they could help us get the word out. When you're absent of anything else to find, anything else to go on, you'd be amazed at what help you might be able to get from the media.
Baltimore police are still investigating the death of 37-year-old blind man, Lemuel Wallace. They're appealing to members of the public for information.
6 weeks after Lemuel's murder, and it seems the case will never be solved.
It's very frustrating as a detective when you just can't find something to go on. There's just nothing there.
But 3,000 miles away, in Oklahoma City, a routine check changes everything. Turns out the life of Lemuel Wallace was very well insured.
I get a call from a representative of this life insurance company. We want to know if it's okay if we pay the claim out.
Well, this is an active investigation, guy. Thank you very much for the information.
There were 2 policies on him. One was just a small insurance policy that would cover funeral arrangements, the cost of that. The second one, though, was very interesting. It was the accidental death insurance policy. It was a relatively new policy, which was within 30 days of the murder, and it included murder.
The payout is $500,000, and curiously, the beneficiary isn't a family member. It's Pastor Kevin Pouchet.
Kevin Pouchet listed himself as Mr. Wallace's brother, so they started to look into Kevin Pouchet.
We had learned that not only was Mr. Pouchet a supervisor with the Ark of Baltimore, we also learned that he was a pastor of a church in Baltimore. This is a very unusual circumstance when you have a pastor that's now connected to an investigation involving murder.
As police are about to discover, there's a lot more to Kevin Pouchet than anyone ever expected. In fact, the good pastor has been living 2 lives, a public one as a model man of the cloth, and a private one that could tear his church apart.
Kevin Pouchet's congregation did not know about his sexuality, and he was fearful that they would find out that he was gay. He had a partner. He wanted to live a life away from his church that perhaps his parishioners wouldn't understand.
Another great sermon today. I know. I'm good.
Having a homosexual relationship is difficult in and of itself, and on top of being an African-American male and trying to live in secret. And I think between the expectations of family, the expectation of God, and societal expectations was just a lot of pressure on him.
It was not common knowledge that Pastor Pouchet was homosexual, but if he was a gay minister, I would not have been attending his church. I don't have a problem with it, but he would not have been my minister.
You got something to say?
Pouchet lived with his partner behind closed doors. Neighbors said that they often heard screaming and fights.
His boyfriend becomes convinced that Pouchet is cheating on him with other men.
Always. I'm calm. I'm sick of this talking.
It's jealousy. What kind of games are you playing? And so it would then become volatile.
No, I'm going to go. No, I'm sick of you lying. To me, to the congregation, to everybody.
Pouchet's boyfriend's claims of betrayal are not far-fetched, Pouchet is visiting gay dating sites. It's there he finds what appears to be his perfect match, another closeted Baltimore preacher named James Clee.
I think that they connected because there was that common bond of the spiritual aspect of it.
Pastor Pouchet is careful to meet his secret lover at expensive restaurants where he knows his jealous boyfriend won't catch him.
He's in a tug of war. He's being torn apart and trying to keep it all together.
For 9 months, Pouchet can't help but spoil the new man in his life.
They did nice things for each other, specifically Kevin doing nice things for Pastor Clee, gifts and trinkets and, money.
Trouble is, Pastor Pouchet's spending well beyond his means.
Kevin is one circumstance from completely falling apart. He's struggling financially, he's struggling with relationships, he's struggling with maintaining an appearance. He's, for lack of a better phrase, he's one matchstick from this powder keg just going up.
That's when the Greater Faith Tabernacle Church of Deliverance burns down.
I think it was certainly questionable fire, likely an arson at his own church.
Our arson unit responds to all, those types of fires, especially if something's suspected. It was undetermined the cause of the fire. So Mr. Pouchet had received approximately $250,000 in insurance for the fire at his church.
That was one of the things that hinted that perhaps he was not brand new to a criminal life, despite having been a very religious figure.
Pouchet has plenty enough money to start over, but when it comes to actually drawing up plans, he spends the money on himself, not fixing up the church.
It was always an open discussion about the building of the new church. He always said that he was waiting for the estimate. So he was pocketing all this money all the time. Nothing never, ever happened.
Pouchet's financial troubles have miraculously disappeared, but he's courting danger, sneaking behind his boyfriend's back to be with Clee.
This is not what it looks like.
That was something that kind of added fuel to the fire, so to speak, and so it just became a very volatile situation.
I can do everything. I swear it's the last time you do this. I'm out. Look what he's done to you. No more in this man. He's out of control. I'll teach you a lesson. Yeah.
Mr. Pouchet said that his partner had infuriated him so bad that, he wanted to get even with him. He was able to reach out to somebody, and that was willing to, for a price, take this person out for him. The shooter wanted $20,000 to do the hit. Mr. Pouchet said that he had this money that he had received from burning his church down.
When you hear pastor, it's hard to imagine that somebody with that on their credentials could then go and arrange a murder.
Pastor Pouchet decides there's more than one benefit to having his boyfriend killed.
Mr. Pouchet took out numerous insurance policies on his lover.
He felt that the insurance scams was the quickest way for him to be able to establish a lot of money relatively quickly.
But before the hitman goes through with the job, Pouchet's boyfriend comes to him begging forgiveness. And being a man of God and all, the pastor accepts his ex-lover's apology. He tries to cancel the job, but the hitman won't do refunds, only exchanges.
The shooter was not allowing him to back out. That if it wasn't this person, he would have to pick someone else.
I don't know. I'll find somebody, all right?
I guess in that discovery, it's like, wait a minute, this was really pretty easy to get a policy like this. This wasn't as difficult as I thought. And so now we have the boilerplate of a murder. The only piece that's missing is actually carrying out the deed.
In the eyes of his congregation, Pastor Kevin Pouchet is a saint among men. Little do they know, their cherished minister is a two-timing homosexual who's plotting the murder of Lemuel Wallace, a blind man with mental disabilities.
I think he picked somebody because of his disability, which makes it even more horrible.
Pouchet impersonates Lemuel and takes out multiple life insurance policies, listing himself as Lemuel's brother and beneficiary. If Lemuel dies, the pastor will walk with a staggering $1.4 million. On February 5th, 2010, the hitman makes his move.
Thank you, Diane.
Lemuel Wallace was looking to move, and that presented a good opportunity to sort of extract him from the building without raising any questions.
Mr. Wallace became the target.
And this is where Kevin's participation is very implicit. He knows the schedule of Lemuel, everything that's involved with this particular house as to how to get this person out.
Thank you, Diane.
Mr. Wallace was excited to go. He was excited. He actually smiled and, said, he was happy to go see his new place.
He doesn't have the slightest inkling this outing will be his last.
The driver came in, said he was there to take him to the new home. The staff there, they were expecting that, so nothing seemed unusual. Mr. Wallace was then escorted out by this gentleman, and that was the last time they ever saw him.
Wallace. Lemuel Wallace.
Thank you, sir. I'm in.
The hitman takes Lemuel on a 20-minute drive to the beautiful but dangerous Leakin Park, the scene of 67 murders in the last 50 years.
Keep your life free from the loved one. I ask you here, which side you want?
He can't see enough to know that he's being led into a bathroom.
There didn't appear to be any signs of any kind of physical altercation or struggle.
He was shot so many times in such critical areas of the body that he probably never knew it hit him, literally.
Mr. Wallace didn't have a chance.
Awaiting his insurance payout, Pouchet must have thought he'd gotten away with the perfect crime. But not so fast. His name on the policy has raised all sorts of questions, and police want answers. Clearly, austerity wasn't part of the preacher's lifestyle. Then a clue that could tie everything together.
It was almost that gotcha moment when my partner brought to me that day planner, and he said, Detective Ross, you should probably look at this. You make it this line right here. This is the day that he was killed. LW project completed. LW is Lemuel Wallace. There was no question in my mind that's what that was. I had to take a step back. I was like, wow, there it is. That's that missing link. That's the piece that we needed.
So, Mr. Pouchet, let's talk about Lemuel Wallace. You knew the man.
That's right.
How well did you know him?
Fairly well, I suppose. I've done a little work with him, yeah.
So we asked him about any type of an insurance policy that he may have put on Mr. Wallace.
People take out life insurance every day, sir.
He said, yeah, that he had spoken with the family and that they had told him that he was suffering from a terminal illness and that he put insurance on him and he had listed himself as a brother and that he was the beneficiary. He didn't see any harm in that.
In that case, could you please explain to me about this diary entry of yours? On the day of the murder, we have here, LW, project completed.
It changes now dramatically. It was almost like he lost his air. And I said, what does that mean exactly? And he hesitates for a little bit. He stares at me intently. And his eyes are batting back and forth.
That's what it says, yes.
Pouchet grasps for an excuse.
It was a housing project I was working on. I renovate houses.
And what does LW stand for?
It was for a living room.
And so I look at him and I go, now you're an educated man, Mr. Pouchet. And I'm an educated man. Exactly how is it you spell living room?
Would you like to explain?
I
I've sat face to face with stone cold killers. Does he come across as a person that could calculate this, put it together? Absolutely.
This case seemed like the tip of the iceberg. They ran his name through insurance policies and found that he had taken out several in the names of people who, some of whom had died. And there was the possibility that this case expanded far beyond this one.
Pastor Pouchet is found guilty of first-degree murder and multiple counts of insurance fraud. He's sentenced to life in prison plus 45 years. The hitman has never been found.
It was very shocking to the congregation. It really was. That pastor, his pastor Pouchet was a murderer.
And well,
I just could not understand why. What reason would make him want to take another human being life, somebody defenseless that could not help themselves?
Strong, huh? Thank you, sir.
I was devastated.
Pouchet said that the reason he was coming clean was because he had to make things right with God.
He's not a pastor. He's someone very evil and sinister posing as a pastor.
I don't think there's any doubt that he is truly one of the worst people on the planet.
As a Christian man and as a police officer, and anytime you have to take, someone that's entrusted in our community, and they betray that trust, whether it's a pastor or a police officer or anybody that has your trust, they ultimately betray that. It's difficult for us as citizens to digest that.
Coming up, one of the biggest televangelists in the world. He's hiding sinful secrets and will crush anyone in his path. Like many teenagers in 1950s Louisiana, Jimmy Swaggart is desperate to leave home and make his mark on the world.
There were really only a few ways out of a little town like Faraday, and one of them was the military, one of them was preaching.
Of course, young Jimmy has had some other influences growing up.
And he spent a lot of time with his cousin, Jerry Lee Lewis, who became a famous rocker.
Jimmy Swaggart wanted to be Jerry Lee Lewis, but he wanted to do it as a religious person rather than a musical star.
And by golly, this charismatic young man will stop at nothing to get there. While Jerry Lee's tearing up the charts, Jimmy's voice is also heard on hundreds of radio stations across the country.
Money started coming in, a lot more money than he was collecting from the collection place on the road. Sometimes people would put him in their wills.
He died for our sins and for our salvation and the savior of our souls.
Over the next 20 years, Jimmy becomes one of the biggest names in radio for the Assemblies of God, the world's largest Pentecostal denomination, with 66 million followers. But as Reverend Swaggart comes to realize, the real money is in television.
Make a donation. Pick up the phone.
That was when he was able to really, really cash in on his talent because people were mesmerized watching him.
Swaggart was the Rolling Stones. I mean, he was the top of the heap.
There was a lot of sexual electricity in the air when he preached. Women would sort of cross and uncross their legs and stir in their seats when he got into a particularly dynamic point in his sermon.
If you were a Jimmy Swaggart follower, you saw him on TV and he gave you some sort of inner belief that you would be okay if you just put your hand on the TV and sent him some money.
Money was the beginning and the end. You had to have it to sustain the ministry.
We need your donations. Please, pick up the phone.
By the early 1980s, Jimmy Swaggart is a one-man industry worth over $160 million.
He had his own zip code. He received more mail than anybody else in the state of Louisiana. He was an anchor of the economy of Baton Rouge.
It was Jimmy's ambition to be number one and to be the biggest TV preacher in the world.
But he's not there yet. Helping him achieve that goal is his dutiful wife, Frances.
She was referred to at the ministry as the Dragon Lady. And that was because she was one tough woman.
Francis is not so much rougher here.
Still, the Swaggarts face some pretty stiff competition for the top of the preaching heap, from the Reverend Jim Baker and his unforgettable wife, Tammy Faye. The Bakers have their own satellite TV channel, the Praise the Lord Network. Swaggart is desperate to find a chink in his armor.
Thank you for coming at such short notice.
They had this TV ministry and would beam it up to the satellite. And everybody wanted to get on Baker's satellite. He controlled it. This was the gateway to riches, God and greed.
Television evangelism is incredibly competitive. They're all out for the same dollar. and you have a great deal of backbiting.
When Swaggart saw Jim Bakker just raking it in and living the high life, he said, that should be me. And he set out deep down, how can I bring this guy down?
There's breaking news in the press.
That's great.
Reverend Jim Bakker is having an affair with his secretary, Jessica Hahn. And Swaggart's going to play it for all it's worth.
We got them.
We got them. Cheers. Jimmy Swaggart went on television to crucify Bakker.
It's the first time a televangelist has broken the code of silence and spoken about the sins of another man of cloth in public. Bakker confesses to the infidelity and is defrocked by the Assemblies of God leadership. Without the power of the church to protect him, his world falls apart even further when the IRS uncovers a massive amount of fraud.
He had brought in money for a Bible school, and he spent it on a theme park, buying Rolls Royces, spending $200,000 on mirrors for his new condo, and things like that that were bringing the IRS down on his head.
Bakker is charged with 24 counts of fraud and conspiracy to commit fraud. He is sentenced to 45 years in prison.
After he knocked off Jim Bakker, Jimmy Swaggart was the unrivaled TV preacher of the era.
Praise be the Lord.
Jimmy Swaggart is now the dawn of televangelism. Raking in $500,000 every day. But when you're on top, there's always someone clawing their way in your direction.
Jimmy Swaggart sees in his backyard here in New Orleans a very popular preacher named Marvin Gorman. He's about to get a big business deal, $7 million deal, so he can get up on the satellite.
He had been friends with Marvin Gorman. He had preached at his church before the things got bad between them.
Swaggart was jealous of Gorman.
God does not care how much money you have. You could have $1 million or $50 million.
To stay top of the heap, Swaggart decides to eliminate the Gorman threat.
Someone in Jimmy's ministry reported a moral failing of Marvin Gorman with a member of his church who had come to him for marital counseling, and it turned erotic.
This church member's name is Linda Savage.
We're just not getting on anymore. You know, I don't know what to do. I'm just not happy.
He claims she made the first romantic move and kissed him.
Thank you, Marvin. You've been such a big help to me. Thank you so much.
Gorman decided to go for it. But guilt prevented him from completing the act. Maybe they didn't do the deed, but it's plenty of ammo for Reverend Swaggart.
When he saw an opportunity to undercut Gorman, there was certain viciousness involved in that.
Posing as a concerned friend and mentor, Swaggart goes to Gorman's aid, secretly recording their meeting.
I'm so ashamed.
It's all right, Brother Gorman. You can confess to me.
Marvin confessed and said he was sorry and please keep it a secret.
Of course, Swaggart has no intention of keeping Gorman's secrets. He just wants leverage.
If you don't step down from the ministry and admit your sins, that we will make them public and destroy you.
Gorman won't step down, so Swaggart reports him to church officials, and they immediately suspend the rising star.
Jimmy really cut him off at the knees. Gorman was a week away from getting a $16 million loan for a satellite uplink and to increase his stations, and that loan went away.
Gorman is forced to declare bankruptcy.
The authority in the Protestant church is all invested in one person, the lone preacher man. His emotions have to be inflammatory, and yet he has to be exemplary in his behavior.
But Swaggart's forgotten the old biblical lesson. Let he without sin cast the first stone. There are rumors swirling that old Jim's not as saintly as he seems.
Marvin Gorman heard the stories about Swaggart going into the red light zone in New Orleans.
He was on TV every night, and prowling around with prostitutes was almost suicidal for his ministry.
And Jesus said, I will come again.
Little do his devoted followers know, Swaggart has regular dates with prostitute Deborah McPhee.
He liked her to pose in poses that he'd seen in magazines that he had preached against.
That's it. Oh, yeah, that's it. And a head thrown back slightly, you're pouting with your lips. Like mouth open. Oh, yeah.
She talked about oral sex. She talked about other things. He practiced safe sex because he didn't like to think that he was actually having intercourse with her.
Seeking revenge, Gorman sends his people to stake out McPhee's motel room. They wait and wait for Swaggart to come a-callin'. And finally, 3 days later, their perseverance pays off.
We got him. We got him. Come here.
They get on the phone and they call Marvin. He's here. Hurry.
Gorman himself wants to catch Swaggart red-handed, so his henchmen buy him some time.
I'll telephone you about our next date.
Sure.
They get him coming out of the room, hanging in the doorway, looking around to see if the coast is clear.
When Swaggart comes out, sees he has a flat tire, he's obviously not going to call AAA to get it fixed.
All of a sudden, he hears, Jimmy, what are you doing here, Marvin? He said, Jimmy, my question is, what are you doing here?
Gorman and Swaggart sit down to make an unholy deal.
What do you want from me?
What do I want? I want my reputation back. I want you to apologize to the world. And I want you to step down from the ministry.
Marvin Gorman gave him an ultimatum, and Jimmy said, okay. When he started driving home, he started thinking, do I really have to do what Marvin says? And the answer is no, I don't have to. He doesn't have any power. He's broken. He's a broken man.
2, 3, 4 months go by, and nothing has happened. So Marvin takes the pictures to the Assemblies of God, to the same people who defrocked him, and said, here's your golden goose. And guess what? He's sitting on some rotten eggs. Swaggart is their #1 guy. He's sending them $12 million a year for their pocketbooks. So if you have that kind of money and power, you don't think anybody will believe your accusers, because you're the credible one. You're the king. You're the best. You're #1.
Swaggart believes the leadership won't risk losing his cash, no matter what Gorman has to say. To his horror, they ban him from television for a year.
You stay off the air that long in that business, you're yesterday's news.
If there's any hope of a comeback, Swaggart knows he's got to come clean.
How could you be so stupid, Jimmy? You absolute idiot!
When I got the pictures, I thought, now I can do the story. This was Christmas, an Easter basket rolled into one.
All of a sudden, there was a sex scandal. And not just a sex scandal involving a preacher, it's a prostitute sex scandal involving a well-known televangelist preacher who was so quick to point the finger at others.
Swaggart's story is about to become front-page news.
How much did he pay you?
Well, he'd usually call up and want me to get him off over the phone and offer $20.
Deborah McPhee tells all for a double spread in Penthouse and a hefty sum of money.
Oh, yeah. That's just great.
Not only was the biggest story in Louisiana, it was one of the biggest stories in the world.
With the story breaking and his $160 million religious empire at stake, Swaggart ignores the Assembly of God's ruling and fights back with the only weapon he knows, television.
He was the master of the medium, and he knew it.
People were waiting for him like they would be waiting for a presidential edict.
This was like a rock concert. Couldn't get a seat.
I do not plan in any way to whitewash my sin.
You could tell something big was about to happen. We didn't know what, but we knew it was going to be something really big.
I have sinned against you, my Lord.
Jimmy was standing there, tears were rolling down his cheeks.
And I have brought disgrace and humiliation and embarrassment upon my wife, Frances.
All of a sudden, you start hearing this sound that sounded like doves cooing.
And I would ask that your precious blood would wash and cleanse every stain.
And it was all these people that were crying along with him. It was just this wall of crying.
Yes, the ministry will continue.
He doesn't say what he sinned about. He just says, I have sinned. And that's all he said about this.
think betrayed is not a strong enough word.
The scandal nearly destroys Swaggart's ministry. Half of his flock abandon him for good.
The fallout wasn't just on his followers. The real devastation was in his inner circle. They believed in him, and when that belief was torn, they were devastated.
Swaggart never fully recovers from the motel scandal, but continues to preach from his ministry in Baton Rouge. His faith may be strong, but his fame is a thing of the past.
For a small donation, I can save your soul.